Yeah, I mean, I've tried it every which way, and I personally don't notice a huge difference in changing the timing. Doing it all in the morning, all at night, split up. I've done it 1 unit 6 times a day. I mean, I've done it every single way, and I didn't really feel that there was much difference other than maybe from controlling your blood sugars and blood glucose. Doing it all before bed, I think, can help manage that a little bit better. But if you're not having any issues with that, then I think it really doesn't matter, and you can kind of do it when's most convenient for you. I think just the most important thing is just that you're doing it consistent daily, right? Yeah, I'm definitely an advocate of utilizing an arm day, especially if they're a lagging body part. I know a lot of people might disagree with me on that and think that, you can grow huge arms doing a push-pull legs or an upper lower. And I kind of disagree on that. I think something's got to give. And I think if you're doing it at the end of a push day or an upper day or whatever, from an energy management standpoint, I think it can become a little lackluster when you're doing them at the end of, a hard push or pull day. And also just from getting adequate volume in, I think it can be difficult. So just like I was saying earlier, where a split's kind of a tool that can be interchangeable based off of what your needs are, I think using an arm day for a period to improve them can definitely be beneficial, and then cycle it out when you feel like you don't need it as much, right? Yeah, obviously acne can always be a potential side effect, especially when you're using exogenous hormones. But for anyone that's doing any kind of sports where they're sweating regularly, you're going to have more potential risk for that. One thing I think that helps a lot of people is getting out of their sweaty clothes as soon as possible after training. I think a lot of people stay in the same clothes after training. They go home, they eat their post-workout meal, hang out for a bit, and they stay in those same clothes for a little while. And I think especially you're sitting in your car seat, you're sitting in a chair at home, you have that clothing that's, sweaty, close to your skin, and kind of suffocating it. So I think bringing a change of clothes or showering at the gym as soon as possible, is definitely going to help reduce your risk for acne. A lot of it can just come from hormonal fluctuations, or inconsistent hormone levels. And a lot of it can just be genetics, but if you're someone using anabolics, not missing your shots and making sure you're keeping your hormone levels stable and stuff like that can go a long way as well. Why would it be hard to let your wife shave your ass? I don't think it was hard at all. I fucking enjoyed that. That's like going to the spa, Just lead into it, man. I mean, it's part of being a bodybuilder. Just sit back and enjoy it. My first cycle was just under 400 milligrams a week of Sustanon. I did 0.75 cc of a mil twice a week. So like 187.5, whatever, 375 milligrams a week of Sustanon. I think I gained like 30 pounds on that cycle. Yeah, I mean, chest is a tough one for me too. I've played around with a million different techniques and exercise selection, splits and volume and everything for chest, and it's definitely not something that I have down to a fine art. I think putting yourself in the best positions possible to feel that contraction with your chest and not having it, being taken over by your shoulders and triceps as much as possible is going to be the most advantageous. John Jewett actually put up a post that was really good a couple weeks back, so maybe look on his Instagram about how to work on weak points, and the one he was specifically discussing was his chest, and gave some tips of things that he was doing, so you can definitely find some good information on that. No, I mean, I don't think any exercise is a must. I don't think there's any one particular exercise that everyone must do to be a good bodybuilder. I didn't really start doing adductor training until I was already at the Olympia level, and I'm sure a lot of guys didn't. Once I started to be a little more, pinpointing with things I needed to improve on my physique, or trying to find, little advantages of making my legs wider if they weren't growing in other directions, whatever. If I couldn't grow my sweep as much as I wanted to, okay, let's build them from the inside out. But I definitely don't think you need them. Do I think they're beneficial? And they can be, absolutely. But if you're someone that, already has gigantic adductors, do I think that you need to be spending time and energy doing adductor training? No, not necessarily. The first job I was working when I started bodybuilding was at a place called Popeye Supplements. It's like Vitamin Shop for Americans that aren't familiar with the chain. It's a big supplement chain here in Canada. And it was honestly the perfect job for a wannabe bodybuilder. I got to be around like-minded individuals, people that were serious about training and health and nutrition, stuff like that. And I learned a lot about supplementation. And then obviously with a young kid with no money, getting the discount on supplements was awesome. And then it wasn't obviously a very physically demanding job. So, I wasn't expelling a bunch of energy that I wanted to be used on training, like a, labor job or something like that. and I had time to eat on my shifts and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's kind of where I started. And then after that, I kind of got into the personal training, coaching game after that, and did that for a while until I started making enough money to be a full-time bodybuilder. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously no doubt that the bro split works. Thousands of bodybuilders had built incredible physiques using the bro split. You know, anyone that was from, you know, my generation or before, or even a little bit after, bro split was kind of par for the course of what we did for our training routine. But the thing with splits is there's no like best split. A split is a tool in the tool belt that you can change at any time based off of what your goals are. You know, if you're someone that needs to improve your legs, well then maybe training them once a week doesn't make as much sense, and allotting volume to something that is maybe a bit more developed, like say you got really good arms and you're doing, you know, an arm day, maybe that's not as needed, where you could allot that volume and those resources somewhere else. So you kind of play around with that, and I've done a million different splits throughout my career, kind of based off of what my physique's needs and my goals are, right? Yeah, I definitely have a foundation of supplements that I take all the time, like my omega-3s, K2, D3, magnesium, those kind of things that I'm taking 365 days a year, and I have for years. And then the other supplements I take kind of are plug and play based off of like what my needs are, what I'm seeing on my blood work and I want to address, or if there's something I want to optimize, you know, like if I want to optimize my sleep or, you know, something else, then I might change my supplementation routine kind of based off that. But there is always a foundation of supplements from Revive that I keep in there all the time. I think you should be mindful of the potential side effects of any performance-enhancing drug, or really any drug, period, that you're putting in your body. I think it's something that you should be aware of and know that there is potential risks for all of them, right? You know, I think you can obviously mitigate risk with dosing, and lower doses can potentially be less harmful. But to say that 200 milligrams of something won't give you side effects or won't cause issues is not necessarily true. But, you know, obviously the higher you go with the dosing, the more inherent risk you're putting yourself in, right? I thought most people that followed me knew what this was from by now, but I guess there's some people that might have been following me more recently and haven't heard me talk about this or kind of know what the story behind this is. The scar on the back of my arm is a surgical scar. I had a spiral fracture of my left humerus arm wrestling Devin Larrett in 2012, June of 2012, so a long time ago now. But yeah, I broke my arm wrestling, so that's the surgical scar. I have a big rod and a bunch of screws in there, which are still there to this day. I've never had them removed. But yeah, no, I didn't tear it, or it's not a stretch mark or nothing like that. It was a broken bone that was surgically fixed a long time ago. Yeah, I don't think the amount of meals is really what's important here. I think it's just the total calories, you know, and if you're eating 6,000 calories a day and you eat it dispersed over 4, 5, 6 meals, or eat it over 2, 3, I don't think the difference is that big in the total, you know, end result. It's just going to be, you know, obviously eating a 2,000 calorie meal isn't easy. You know, doing that consistently, you know, those are really big meals. It can be hard to digest. It can be, you know, difficult to eat that quantity of food in one sitting for a lot of people. So distributing them a little more evenly through more meals can be easier for some people. But it really depends on your schedule. If you're someone that, you know, getting in 3 meals is way easier for you and is bringing less stress to your day, then I think that's probably the way to go. You know, like for a long time, a lot of guys were like, you have to do 6 meals. And I know a lot of bodybuilders now in the off season do 4 or 5, but do them a little bigger and space them out a little more. So you need to find what works for you, right? Not really. I mean, you know, being in a bigger and bigger caloric surplus isn't going to render more and more muscle growth, right? It's going to render more fat tissue accumulation for sure. So, you know, and I don't think there's ever any benefit to gaining more body fat. I think you're just actually making things more difficult on yourself. I think it's going to make your prep more difficult. I think you're going to ruin insulin sensitivity at a higher rate. So I think, you know, being in the amount of surplus you need to fuel your body for the training and the, you know, the recovery, I think is necessary for sure. I think you need to be, you know, fueling your body to perform at its highest level possible. As long as you're progressing in your lifts and you're seeing progressions in your physique, you know, even if they're not massive on the scale, I think that's really all you need to be worried about. You know, I think guys get caught up in the numbers too easily, and they want to see big numbers and they just end up getting fat. So no, I don't think that's beneficial. Yeah, I mean, this isn't easy. Obviously, it's hard not to compare ourselves, especially in a sport like bodybuilding sport, that is based on comparison. It's literally what being on stage is. You're being compared to other guys. So, when you see other people that may be the same age as you or started around the same time as you, progressing at a different rate than you, it's hard not to compare yourselves to them. I think one thing to remember is that not everyone progresses at the same rate, and that doesn't mean that the ending point can't be just as good or even better. We've seen bodybuilders that come out the gate winning pro debuts, and they're really hot for the first couple of years, but then they kind of stay the same and don't make a ton of progress after that. And we've seen guys that are just very slow and progressive in their career, that end up being really top tier bodybuilders, but they didn't get there overnight, right? So, I think just keep your eyes focused on what your long-term goal is. And try not to worry too much about what the other guys are doing, because you might end up in a better place at the end of the day anyways, right?